The siren over Oakridge hadn't wailed in years, not for storm drills or parades, and yet on a rain-choked Thursday it found its old voice. The lobby doors of the police department belched inward on a gust, and a German shepherd lurched through. Coat caked with mud, streaked dark with blood, chest heaving as if he'd outrun a fire. Straps of torn fabric crossed his back like makeshift rigging. Tied into them, small and frighteningly still, was a child. The girl's hair was matted, her face the color of milk, her arms slack at her sides. The dog set his legs, braced against the tile, and lowered himself with the care of a medic, placing a life on a gurney. "Jesus," Deputy Larson said, already moving. His hands hovered, unsure of what to touch first. The shepherd bared his teeth, not with anger but with warning, then fixed his eyes on the girl, as if the rest of the world could burn, and he'd hold that gaze steady. Blood gathered under his paws, his breathing rattled, shallow and hot. From the hallway, Sheriff Mason Cooper stepped into view, jacket half on, expression stalling between disbelief and recognition. "Tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing." Larson looked up. "It's her. It's Emma Mitchell." "Jack's little girl," Cooper said, the words as heavy as boots. 8 years old, missing 3 days. "And the dog?" Larson asked, as paramedics took the girl and began cutting the straps. Somewhere farther down the hall, a radio chattered the way radios do when a town holds its breath. Cooper didn't need a second look. Hunter. Time inside the room elongated to the metronome of the heart monitor they clipped to the girl's finger. As they worked, the shepherd's eyes never left her face. Not when they lifted her, not when a paramedic's elbow brushed his muzzle, not when his own body trembled like a cord pulled too tight. Someone whispered that it looked like he'd been darted, more than once. Another voice said a dog couldn't make decisions like this. No one said it. Twice, rain beaded on a woman's FBI windbreaker as she entered, shaking water from her shoulders. Her suit was black, her badge flashed quick, her posture more precise than polite. Agent Cassidy Reynolds took in the scene. The blood, the dog, the girl, and something about her jaw set. She knelt, not too close, and spoke softly, as if to a person, not a dog. "You've brought her home," she said, and then, almost to herself, "and you're not finished." The shepherd pulled himself upright. For a blink, his front end dipped, the room collectively leaned forward, then he planted his paws and faced the door. He glanced back once at the girl on the table. One check, one promise, and then looked squarely at Reynolds, the message clean enough for skeptics. "Follow me." He wasn't just a dog. Not to the Mitchells, not to Oakridge, and certainly not to Emma. 3 years earlier, Jack Mitchell and his daughter had walked into the county shelter for what Jack called a look. They left with a German shepherd, that staff said was 5, but whose eyes looked older. He had a bite of one ear missing, a slash of scars across his flank, and the kind of quiet that used to belong to a different life. Jack had once been a Marine, later a contractor. He had hands that could turn metal and wood into something that worked. After his wife, Sarah, was murdered in their home, those hands learned a different habit: bottles, cabinets, anything that could sleep a memory. He didn't want the dog. He didn't want anything. Emma didn't look at the puppies everyone else looked at. She knelt in front of the battered shepherd as if he were a person sitting alone on a bench. "This one," she said. "His eyes are sad like mine." The volunteer said the dog didn't make a sound around other animals, didn't beg, didn't try to impress. He just watched. Jack could barely stand to look at him. Sarah had loved shepherds, loved this one. He had been hers. On the night Sarah died, he had been the only survivor besides 8-year-old Emma. Jack took that fact like a blade. In a fit of grief, he had dumped the dog right back at this shelter. Emma had cried without sound until he turned around and brought the dog home again. Hunter slept in Emma's doorway and trained himself to wake when she did. On nights when the past barged in and the air shrank, he climbed onto her bed and pressed his weight against her legs until her breathing matched his. She told him things she told no one else. She tucked secret drawings under his vest. When Jack finally looked at them, he realized they were maps. On a Tuesday that pretended to be normal, Jack kissed Emma's hair and dropped her at school with the same line, "See you at 3." And Hunter watched her through the truck window like a soldier on a transport. By 3:15, when Jack pulled into the pickup lane, the yard was empty. The office said she'd been signed out early for a family emergency. Jack felt the world tip. "Wasn't that you?" the secretary asked. Too late. Within an hour, the sheriff's department had volunteers combing the edge of town, and by nightfall, the FBI had set a base in the firehouse meeting room. Hunter paced Jack's kitchen like the ground itself was talking to him, nose to the air vent, to the sill, to the doorknob. Jack snapped at him to settle. Hunter took a step, a breath, and went still. Agent Reynolds, invited and not, watched the dog the way you watch an instrument that has never let you down. "He's reading something," she said. "We should follow." "Ma'am, we've got trained K9, Cooper said, not unkindly. "We don't need a pet with history." Jack, frayed and angry and soaked in the kind of terror that makes you mean, locked Hunter in the laundry room and pushed a chair under the knob. Hunter howled until neighbors shut their windows. Then, like a diver surfacing, silence. After midnight, Jack returned home with knuckles that ached from turning doorknobs and shouting his child's name into rain. He opened the laundry room door. Hunter didn't rush the water bowl. He didn't nose the empty food dish. He walked past Jack and sat at the door of the study, Sarah's office, where the wood still knew her shape. He scratched once, gently, as if asking permission. Jack's breath thinned. "No," he said, "not that room." When he turned away, his arm knocked a bottle off a shelf. Whiskey slashed across the floor. The smell found the dog and made him lean back on his heels, but he didn't break eye contact. In that look, Jack saw neither fear nor defiance. He saw a steadiness he had abandoned in himself. His phone vibrated. "We found her backpack," Reynolds said, "near Miller's Creek, signs of a struggle." Jack looked back at the doorway. The front door stood ajar. Hunter was gone. By first light, the dog had covered miles no man would have taken in the dark. He crossed water that stole heat. Thorns took pieces of him, and he gave them without slowing. He ran the edges of town and the edges of memory, nose deep, paws raw, moving toward what he could not know and could not do. Locals called the ridge beyond the quarry the Devil's Backbone. Old mines, myth, and stupid dares. Beneath a blind of branches and leaves, Hunter found what they had not found in 3 days. A slabbed-over mouth of earth that exhaled generator air and cigarette smoke. Inside, the concrete sloped and collected voices. The shepherd pressed his chest to the floor and slid. He was only muscle and purpose. He didn't bark. He listened. A girl cried in the dark. He knew that sound the way you recognize your name in a foreign language. He found the heavy door by the stain it left on the air. He pressed his nose to the gap at the bottom and breathed her in. Fear, dirt, that lemon shampoo note from 3 days ago that had already almost left the world. "Hunter!" came a sound so thin it seemed made of paper. He whined low. Small fingers pushed under the door. He pressed his muzzle against them as if he could transfer warmth by thought, alone. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered. "They smell like that night." She meant cologne. She meant the sharp chemical note that had drifted in behind Sarah's death. Hunter's ears flicked toward voices, footsteps. He backed into shadow. "Dinner time, princess," a man said, as the lock spun. The door opened on hinges that wanted oil. The tray he carried hit the floor before he knew what had moved. The shepherd came out of dark, like a thrown object, silent, teeth on the forearm that reached for a gun. The man screamed. The shepherd didn't let go. Across town, Agent Reynolds watched a screen on which a small dot blinked steady. She had activated the GPS microchip in Hunter's collar the night before, without asking anyone's permission. It wasn't exactly standard procedure. "He's stopped," she said. "We have her." Cooper stared, then barked orders until uniforms moved like a choreographed thought. Emma slid out past the fight, small and shoeless, hand on the wall as if the concrete could tell her which way was out. Hunter appeared at her side, blood on his mouth, eyes clear. She led him to a storage room with a narrow window high on the wall. He stood still beneath it. "I can't," she said, looking at his breadth and the gap. He huffed once. She put her foot between his shoulder blades and climbed. Her fingers found a latch. The window shrieked open against wet wood. She squeezed through, heart knocking against bone, and fell into wet grass outside. "Come on," she begged, but the space didn't understand loyalty and would not let him pass. He barked once, soft and urgent. Footsteps pounded down the corridor behind him. He turned to face them. Emma ran. Branches clawed, but not like hands. The sky opened and forgot how to stop. Headlights cut through trees and hit her like questions. A woman in a white coat with a vet's leather bag stepped out from behind a truck. Dr. Sarah Andrews, Oakridge's favorite, moved carefully, like approaching a wounded thing. "Emma," she said, voice gentle, "are you hurt? Let me check you." "You smell like them," Emma said. The words arrived before she understood what part of her had produced them. It was there on the air, the same cologne, the same wrong. Dr. Andrews's eyes flicked, the smallest shift. Her hand went to her bag. A syringe glinted. "Hands!" Agent Reynolds shouted from the tree line, and the night exploded in red dots and commands. Jack, soaked and shaking and wild with something bigger than speed, came. Hard behind her. The syringe never found a vein. A shape blew out of the brush like a thrown engine and hit the woman's center mass. Hunter. The needle flew. The bag tumbled. The ground took both of them. The raid on the bunker went fast and ugly. Foot soldiers with mud on their boots and confusion on their faces were pulled out of doorways and zip-tied. Ledgers, phones, coded calendars, evidence made of paper, battery, ink, was bagged. But Thomas Blackwood, the man whose name wrapped itself around a youth center and a gala and 1,000 smiles, was gone. That, Reynolds said without drama, could be fixed. They took Emma and Hunter to 2 different wings of the same building. Oakridge Memorial Hospital, which could cradle both children and animals when a town needed it to. Emma had bruises and the skinned knees of worse summers. Hunter had the kind of injuries that tend not to negotiate. Lung puncture, blood loss, trauma layered on trauma. Dr. Patel in the veterinary wing worked as if the world directly depended on it. In a way, it did. "He's not surviving," she muttered to no one in particular, hands sure, voice steady. "He's deciding." Jack sat in a chair that made noise when you breathed. He watched his daughter sleep under a blanket the color of a cartoon ocean and counted the seconds between asking and answering the same question. Is he going to make it? Emma woke and asked it out loud. Jack said, "He's fighting." It was all he had that could be called true. When Agent Reynolds came with what looked like relief and anger in equal measure, she took Jack aside. "It's bigger than we thought," she said. "Blackwood's foundation is a lattice, the youth programs, screening ground. Your wife was building a case, Jack." Jack stared at the wall and saw Sarah the way you remember a person in fragments. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when she read. The way she held silence like a professional tool. "She didn't tell me," he said. "She didn't want to put you in the line." Reynolds answered, neither judging nor forgiving. "But she left something." The next morning, a forensic tech held Hunter's collar like it was made of glass. "It's thicker than a normal one," Reynolds said. heavier. We think she hid something in it. They opened it with the care people reserve for gifts and bombs. Inside the stitched leather was a waterproof capsule with a micro SD card. On it were numbers with meanings, account transfers, shell company trees, photographs that rearranged how a town viewed its philanthropist. There was also a voice file, and when they played it, Sarah's voice made the room forget how to pretend. "This is Sarah Mitchell," it said, crisp as if she were across the table. "If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. Thomas Blackwood is trafficking children through his charities. I have names and routes and money trails. It's stored someplace only the dog can reach. If you found it, he led you. Don't let this man walk away." The silence after the recording wasn't the heavy kind. It was the kind that people breathe in before they move. Emma took her father's hand and tugged him toward the hospital garden. Hunter, bandaged and slower, walked with them, scanning the air the way a radar listens. "He's looking for something," Emma said. Jack watched his ears, the micro-tilts like micro-decisions. "Your mum used to hide things," he said carefully. "Treasure hunts," Emma nodded. "She called them that. Treasure." The word hit Jack like a dropped tool. "The pond," he said aloud, because sometimes thoughts don't become real until they're spoken. "Behind the house. Do you think—" Hunter lifted his head at the name he knew, Sarah, and wagged his tail once. That settled the matter. The pond didn't look like a place that would save anything. It was not picturesque. Cattails leaned. The bench was tired. The water wore a film of last season's leaves. It had always been a place for quiet, and after Sarah's death, it had become where Jack went to. Feel nothing at all. Agent Reynolds stood with her hands in her coat pockets and watched the dog and the man and the child stand at the edge like congregants. "You're sure?" she asked Jack. He almost laughed. "No," he said, "but I'm done ignoring the animal that keeps pulling us out of the dark." Jack crouched, placed his palm on wet fur, and spoke the word that belonged to a game that wasn't a game anymore. "Treasure." Hunter stepped in as if the cold were a rumor. He swam to the center with a neat economy of movement, turned like he'd counted and found the place, and dove. Seconds stretched taut. He surfaced with a box in his teeth, the kind used for first aid kits, strapped shut, silt black. He swam back, dropped it at Jack's feet, and without ceremony turned and went again. He did this 5 times. On the last return, his legs trembled, and he folded in the grass like someone closing a book. Inside the boxes was proof and motive and a map of rot. Photographs that explained the cologne from a year ago, ledgers in a hand Sarah had imitated and preserved, a flash drive with dates that meant something to accountants and prosecutors, a letter addressed to Jack, written a week before she died. He read it at the kitchen table of the safe house while the rest of the world organized itself around it. He read it twice. Then he folded it. He touched it to his chest like a foolish shield and cried finally, the way a person does when he realizes that being strong had been a costume. Blackwood made contact, as men like him do, through people who thought they'd never be used for something like that. He wanted a meeting. He wanted originals, not copies, and he assumed men like Jack would trade anything for the word safe. Reynolds arranged what she called a trap, with no romance and every sharp edge. She hid people where roofs meet walls, and in the backs of trucks with engines off, and in the tall grass where snakes were probably more afraid of them than the other way. Around. Jack wore a wire, and the kind of look that says a person has stopped being afraid of losing anything else. The barn at the edge of the tobacco field had leaned there for years and had no interest in history. Jack walked into it, carrying a case that held nothing Blackwood wanted. Blackwood adjusted his cufflinks in the shadows, as if anyone cared. "You look tired," he said, like a dentist might tell a patient his gums were bleeding. "You look like a man running out of road," Jack answered. He did not shake hands. "Where's my daughter?" "Safe," Blackwood said, smiling like a person who collects photographs of himself smiling. Jack lifted the case. Blackwood lifted a gun. The rafters lit in a galaxy of red. "Weapon down," came a voice that made Barnes remember what orders sounded like. For a second, Blackwood looked like a person to whom things were finally happening instead of a person to whom things happened for. He was cuffed without a ceremony. Back at the safe house, Emma and Hunter slept on the couch like a picture people frame. Jack sat on the floor with his back against the coffee table and watched both of them breathe. "You did it," he whispered into the shepherd's fur. "You brought her back." 2 weeks later, the trial began in a building that smelled like old wood and fluorescent tubes. Blackwood pled not guilty with a mouth that had practiced the shape. It didn't matter. Sarah's evidence had made consent and doubt into relics. Dr. Andrews, in a courtroom traded truths for years. She had chosen loyalty to a man over obligation to children, and in the end, she had cracked. It wasn't redemption, it was information. Jack and Emma visited Sarah's grave after that first long day. He brought the letter. Emma brought wildflowers tied with kitchen string. Hunter sat like a statue with a live heart. Jack told Sarah things he had said into the ceiling at night and meant less than now. "He kept his promise," he said. "We're still here." Emma leaned her head against his arm. "Mom," she said to the stone, which is another way of saying it to a sky, "Hunter says hi." The house felt wrong in the way places do when news cameras leave and dishes are done, and quiet tries to sell itself as peace. Reynolds stopped by to say that someone had tipped Blackwood before the raid, and that meant a leak. Jack tightened locks he didn't have the money to replace and put furniture in front of the windows, because humans think in terms of furniture when they feel small. He dozed on the couch. At 3:07 a.m., the back window surrendered with the sound of a breaking promise. Hunter's head rose before Jack knew why his own heart had kicked. Jack pulled Emma to the floor behind the armchair without words. He reached for his phone. Dead. The power was cut, footsteps on wood measured. The front door swung open and Thomas Blackwood walked in like he'd been invited, a gun balanced in one hand and an expression that made you understand what some people mean when they talk about money as if it were air. "You're supposed to be in custody," Jack said. He sounded calm because there wasn't time to sound anything else. "Money buys nuisance out of the way," Blackwood said, "and sometimes it buys a ride." Behind him, Dr. Andrews stood pale and bleeding around the edges of a bandage. "You have something that's mine," Blackwood said. "Your wife was a diligent woman. She made backups. I'd like them." "You're late," Jack said, stalling for seconds. "The FBI has everything." "Not everything," Blackwood answered, and the way he said it made the room feel smaller. He raised the gun. Emma's name left Jack's mouth without permission. She peeked out, which is what children do when they hear their names. Blackwood smiled with all his teeth. "There she is." The living room didn't have time to prepare for the mass of fur and muscle that left the floor and found the space between a man with a gun and a child. Hunter hit Blackwood chest first. The gun went off, a hot bloom of sound. The bullet went somewhere that wasn't Jack. Dr. Andrews cried out and folded around her stomach. The gun skittered. Jack went for it. Blackwood got a hand on it first. They collided with a low table that had survived marriages and moves and couldn't survive this. Hunter, bleeding anew, launched again. His jaws caught Blackwood's wrist. Another shot tore through nothing they loved. Emma screamed a sound that wasn't a word. Jack threw a punch that started a year earlier and didn't stop until Blackwood did. Silence dropped, heavy and awful. Hunter collapsed, breath aflutter under wet bandage. Emma crawled, tears mixing with the blood on his fur. "Please," she said, "please wake up." Sirens arrived late the way sirens always do in stories and life. Agents put cuffs on Blackwood that didn't care how he differentiated bonds. Paramedics pressed on Dr. Andrews' wound and said things in tones that implied they would say them better if you gave them room. Reynolds walked in, saw the shepherd, and spoke into her radio with the urgency of a person who knows which lives are the tentpoles of other lives. "We need an animal medevac, Richmond trauma," she said. The medic shook his head. "He's not stable enough to move." Emma stood, small and fierce. "He's not dying," she said. "He's pretending. He did that before when there was danger." Reynolds looked at her, then at the dog, then made a choice. "We're moving him." In the helicopter's noise, Emma held Hunter's paw and spoke into his ear like a prayer. "You promised Mom. I promise you." The surgical team in Richmond didn't ask for backstory. They opened a space and kept him in it. "If he weren't who he is," the lead surgeon said, "I'd say no." Hours passed. Vending machines hummed as if they could fill anything important. Jack counted lines in the tile. Reynolds brought updates in phrases that didn't threaten to break. The surgeon finally came out with gloves off and fatigue behind his eyes. "He's alive," he said. "The next day is the part we don't get to script." That night, when Emma stepped into the recovery kennel room, Hunter opened his eyes for her and for her alone. She laid a hand on his head and put her forehead to his and said, almost annoyed, "You scared me." He gave a soft sound that barely qualified as a whine. It was everything. Across town, agents connected dots until they drew a net. Dr. Andrews talked in the way of someone who had been loyal too long and had run out of things to trade for sleep. Blackwood, for once, could not purchase air. Raids rolled out like quiet waves. Children came home. Sarah's name led news segments and street corner conversations. Jack did not watch. He sat in a plastic chair and learned the rhythm of canine monitors and the way nurses' shoes sound when good news has to be delivered softly. Hunter stood on his own 3 days later. His legs shook. Everyone in the room held their breath like a superstitious crowd. He took 2 steps. Emma cried in the way that releases and remakes. Dr. Patel smiled the curve of a person who had watched an animal decide to remain. "Strong will," she said. "Stronger heart." The outside world kept its momentum. Blackwood was in federal custody, not the hallway kind where locks are suggestions. Dr. Andrews stayed in a hospital under guard, confessions stapled to cart after cart of evidence. People in town realized that benevolence had been a mask for hunger. That knowledge rearranged 1,000 small things about how they said hello to one another and who they trusted with their children. A nurse found a small wooden box under Hunter's bed when they turned his linen. "This must be yours," she told Jack. The lid said, "For Jack," in Sarah's hand. Inside was a voice recorder and a letter that didn't apologize for secrets because it didn't need to. It told Jack he loved harder than he knew, that she had seen the light in him when he couldn't see anything, that she had trained the dog not just for Emma but for him, for the day he would stop trusting himself to find his way. It told him to make Sarah a person in Emma's stories, not a ghost, to trust the dog, to not let grief turn to stone. Jack read it to Emma that night. They cried, the silent kind and the shaking shoulders kind. Hunter slept at their feet and let out one long exhale like a house releasing the last of its heat. They went home when the stitches allowed it. Jack opened Sarah's office and let the dust float and settle again. He framed her awards not like trophies, but like reminders of a job still echoing in the world. He replaced the liquor with books. Dinner became a thing made in pans and eaten at a table instead of something purchased in a bag and consumed in a truck. Hunter got his own chair, which was the kind of joke that saves people. One morning, with the first light snow laying careful on the porch, Jack found Emma at the sliding door, staring at the pond. Hunter sat beside her, tail thump-thump on the rug. "Do you think she knew," Emma asked, "that she might die?" Jack answered in a way he had promised to, honest and simple. "She knew the danger," he said, "and she tried to stop it first." Agent Reynolds returned with donuts and updates. "The files your wife kept are removing bad people from rooms across the country," she said, not for effect. "She changed the shape of things." Jack looked at the recorder on the table and smiled at the understatement. On Sunday, they took flowers to Sarah and didn't speak for a while. Jack knelt and said the things men say when they aren't performing. He promised the parenting he had avoided. He promised truth with its edges on. Emma placed daisies and said she missed the way her mother's laugh made the ceiling sound lower, like a tent. Hunter sat with them and made the picture of a family not whole, but still together. Weeks turned. Hunter's coat shone again. He preferred a certain patch of sunlight and the spot under Emma's, and desk where pencils rolled. The day the town retired him unofficially, at the firehouse with mismatched chairs and a banner that tried, Jack had to adjust the microphone because his hands were clumsy with gratitude. He said he wasn't good with speeches. He said a dog had hauled him out of a place people can't breathe. He took a small metal tag from a wooden box and clipped it to Hunter's collar. It read, "Always faithful, forever family." The room applauded a living thing that didn't ask to be a symbol. Hunter leaned into Jack's chest and closed his eyes. That was his speech. Agent Reynolds moving to a different city, because that is what federal life does to the people who keep promises, sat on the porch swing with iced tea and asked whether Jack would ever write it all down. Jack nodded toward the kitchen where Emma showed two friends her handmade book with colored tabs and drawings of a dog that looked like a superhero. "I don't need to," he said. "She is." At night, when the pond made small sounds and fireflies stitched bright stitches in the dark, Jack sat with Hunter and wrote one last letter and folded it and let it fall into the water to join the other truths buried there. He talked to Sarah about grief and how it hadn't turned him to stone. He talked about their daughter's jokes. He talked about how sometimes he could feel her in a room, not as a ghost, but as a gravity. The world did what it always does. It moved. Emma started 4th grade. She wrote for the school paper and turned in a story called How My Dog Saved the World and Me, which made her teacher cry in the privacy of her car. Jack volunteered at the shelter and worked with dogs that flinched at hands and learned again that patience is a language. They adopted Cody, a lab mix with too much joy to be useful but enough to be right, and Hunter tolerated him with the long-suffering grace of a veteran. On the anniversary of Sarah's death, they lit candles at the pond and told stories that did not require the softening of endings. Emma read from her journal, "Love doesn't disappear, it changes shape." Jack placed a small carved shepherd with wings on the bench with a plaque beneath it. Sarah Mitchell, mother, wife, reporter. She lit the path. We kept walking. Sometime after the last of the casseroles and interviews and headlines, after the trial and the retellings rummaged through every room and then left, Jack and Emma, and a dog who had decided to remain, found something that wasn't quite happiness and wasn't just the absence of fear. It was ordinary life with an anchor. It was breakfast. It was homework at a table while a shepherd snored. It was the door that clicked and the footsteps that meant home. And because this is a story told on a screen, where people gather to feel things together, here is where I say what you already know. Sometimes the hero isn't the one with words. Sometimes the hero is the thing that refuses to let go when everything else does. If a dog ever tries to lead you somewhere, maybe trust him. He might be headed toward the truth or toward the person you need to be to survive the truth. We're grateful you watched, and we're grateful you felt it with us. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of an animal that stood between you and the dark, share it with someone who needs it. And if you want more true stories of courage and loyalty, you know where to find us. The comments are open. Tell us what your hero looks like and whether he has 4 legs and amber eyes. Because in Oakridge, a German shepherd named Hunter didn't just find a girl, he found a family. He found a way back for a man who thought the road had ended. And he reminded a town that sometimes the bravest thing a heart can do is keep beating.